So, so last class we looked at some of the basics of the neuron and its and its parts of the neuron, and we started looking at the basis of electrical activity of a neuron. So we talked about Nernst potential and the idea of a membrane potential. So we just presented some simple arguments and tried to construct this circuit model of the neuron. So neural membrane. So because it has a capacitor and a bunch of serial combinations of the conductances and the corresponding Nernst potentials of various ionic species. So you have for sodium, for voltage gated sodium, you have a conductance and battery in series. Similarly, something for potassium, and then all the other constant conductances are combined into something called the leakage conductance and the corresponding leakage Nernst potential. So we also argued how if you want to increase the potential, you have to open the sodium channels, right? And if you have to decrease the potential, you have to open the potassium channels. Okay, so now what happens at the axon hillock, which is what we discussed last time, is if you inject some current into axon hillock, that as you progressively increase the amplitude of the current pulse, right, the voltage also increases in amplitude almost linearly up to a point. But beyond that point, you see suddenly this large excursion in voltage, producing a sharp voltage spike called the action potential. Now the question is, why does it happen? Why does this action potential get generated, specifically at the axon hillock? So basically, the action potential or AP is a nonlinear response. So what happens when the input current crosses a threshold, then it suddenly this kind of response appears. It's mainly because of the voltage dependent sodium and potassium channels. If you didn't have that voltage dependency property, if you had only leakage kind of conductances, right, then you won't have an action potential. Right? Why is that? Because voltage dependent channels are nonlinear conductances. So let us look into that a little bit. So in the upper figure, upper part of the slide, you see the simple RC parallel circuit. You might remember some of these basics from your high school electrical circuit theory, or probably you might have done some course in your first year. So I am injecting some current into it, a current pulse, a rectangular pulse like this. And in response to that, the voltage that is generated here will look something like this, right? A rising exponential followed by a falling exponential. So this you know. So this is what you will get if you have a passive resistance and conductance combination, or resistance and capacitance combination, or a conductance and capacitance combination. But if you have this resistance is an active resistance, in the sense it is a nonlinear resistance or a nonlinear conductance, G, which is a function of Vm itself, then what happens is, first of all, this nonlinearity can come only if there are some active sources. So we'll look at this later. So if there's some way of generating energy, right, and which is behind this nonlinear dependency, then what can happen is this input pulse, when you give a current pulse, the response need not be linear like this. So in the first case, if you keep on increasing current pulse amplitude, this exponential rise and fall will keep on increasing in amplitude. You won't see any nonlinear effects. But because this conductance is nonlinear, right, and you see a sharp increase in voltage, which is what you see in case of an action potential. That's a simple explanation. We'll give a more concrete explanation in the form of equations later on. So what happens when you when you inject the current into the soma or close to the close to the axon hillock is first the sodium channels open because they are voltage dependent, and when you inject current, the membrane voltage increases. So therefore, that voltage opens sodium channels because they are voltage dependent. Then when you open voltage sodium channels, you know that that increases the voltage, membrane voltage. So there's a kind of a positive feedback, right? One thing reinforces the other. So this goes on for some time. In slowly, what happens is increasing voltage also happens to open potassium channels, although after a little bit of delay. When potassium channels open, you know that voltage goes down. So basically, the same initial increase in voltage opens sodium channels, but rapidly, but also opens potassium channels after a bit of delay. So because of this joint effect, right, the first phenomenon increasing the voltage, second phenomenon decreasing the voltage, all this happens quite rapidly. So therefore, you see a sharp increase in voltage followed by a sharp decrease in voltage. And the decrease in voltage even takes you slightly below the baseline voltage of minus 70 millivolts. right? And then you come back up. Okay, so if you just the same thing is shown here in a more detailed picture, right? Showing the events that occur in various parts of the action potential. So in biology, you like to give names for everything. So this once the threshold is crossed, you see the sharp increase in voltage. So this is called the rising phase. This is called the falling phase, and this is called so after depolarization. So there's a term called polarization and depolarization. See, normally the polarity of the cell is negative inside, positive outside. But when the action potential is generated, the polarity switches. The membrane potential inside becomes positive. That is, after this point, right? So therefore, you say that the membrane is depolarized. Okay, the polarity is switched. So when it comes back to normal to the baseline, you say it has again normal polarity. But if it goes below the baseline, we call it hyperpolarization. Right? It is more polarized than even normal. So this is the action potential. The dashed line is the action potential. So these two solid lines, right, indicate the variation of the conductance of sodium and conductance of potassium. So we say that after this initial increase in voltage, sodium channels open. That means sodium conductance is increased. So that is shown by the first curve, this first solid curve. And then after a delay, you see that the potassium channels also opens. Therefore, potassium conductance increases. And potassium conductance falls, but slowly. Both rise and fall of potassium conductance is a bit slow. That depends upon certain time constants. Whereas for sodium, both rise and fall are pretty much faster than potassium. So therefore, that explains basically why the action potential takes on its special shape. So all this was worked out by two British researchers, Hodgkin and Huxley, and they were awarded Nobel Prize in 1963. So like I was saying the last time, they were working with the giant squid axon, and because the squid axon is pretty large and easy to work with, so purely for practical reasons, they've chosen that kind of an axon. Okay, so now you have come to the axonic hillock. Now let us see how the signal generated, the action potential generated at the axonic hillock propagate further down along the axon. So the axons also have a lot of voltage dependent sodium potassium channels. So therefore, the signal, the action potential generated, let's say it's here, can propagate down the axon without much loss of energy, loss of amplitude. That's because you have a lot of sodium potassium channels in the axon membrane. And also one more thing that happens in the axon is that the axon is surrounded by a sheath, right, a special coat, which is made up of something called myelin. And myelin is an insulating material. So therefore, there's not much leakage of charge from the axon into the extracellular space. But that is one reason why the signal amplitude is not lost much. The other reason is it is actively, so that is passively you insulate and prevent loss of charge, and actively also because of voltage dependent sodium potassium channels, it charges up the signal, and so therefore for these reasons the signal propagates down the axon without loss of amplitude. And one more thing is you see that as the signal propagates down the axon, right, so the presence of myelin sheath basically increases the conduction velocity. So so the myelin sheath is also given by a certain cell called oligodendrocyte. Therefore, it has to be of a small length, or finite length, because axons can be pretty long, and a long axon can be a few feet long. So, a single cell, the oligodendrocytes in the CNS are not that long. So, therefore, you have multiple cells, oligodendrocytes, wrapping around the axon like this, and there are small gaps between points where there is no oligodendrocyte. So, these are called the nodes of Ranvier. And points where there is oligodendrocyte, there you have larger, higher conduction velocities, right? So therefore, what happens is the signal propagates at a higher velocity underneath the oligodendrocyte or the myelin sheath. Once it reaches the node of Ranvier, right, it slows down a little bit in this stretch, and again it speeds up, again slows down here, and so on. So it looks as if the signal is jumping from node to node, basically because of this uneven distribution of velocity. And that kind of a velocity is called saltatory conduction. And saltatory has nothing to do with salt. right? It just describes a kind of a, like, it looks like a jumping of a frog, right? So the API seems to jump from node to node. And the propagation of action potential is also much faster in the myelinated axon compared to unmyelinated axons. In unmyelinated, it can be anywhere between 0.2 to 2 meters per second, which is quite low, right? And in myelinated, it is 12 to 120 meters per second. So this is how it looks, right? And so then in the dendritic side, you don't have this kind of voltage sensitive voltage or voltage dependent ion channels. And therefore the propagation along dendrites is lossy. You can describe the equivalent circuit of the dendrite something like this. So we have seen at a given point, the membrane can be described as a parallel of a capacitor and one, not one inductor, but one conductance, but a bunch of conductances. I'm just giving a simplified description as a parallel of a resistor and a capacitor. In the dendritic side also, instead of just, so this is equivalent at one point in the membrane. If a membrane is a long structure like a wire, right, which is what the dendrite is, then you have to represent that using a chain of such RCs separated by resistors. So we'll discuss all this later in much more detail. So if you have a circuit like this, and if you inject current somewhere in one node of this circuit, that will produce a voltage wave, and that voltage wave, as it propagates down this kind of a circuit, right, keeps losing amplitude. Because therefore the amplitude of the voltage wave decreases with this the distance, and the width of the voltage wave also increases with distance. So this lose amplitude and spreads in time. Okay, so that is how the signal propagation is in various parts of the neuron, and you see that all three events or all three signaling steps are electrical. Now we come to the last step, which is what happens when the signal arrives at the end of the axon and jumps across synapse to the other neuron. And that step is called neurotransmission, and it is a chemical step like we discussed before. So we talked about the presynaptic terminal and the postsynaptic terminal. This is synaptic structure. So the action potential arrives at the presynaptic terminal, and then what happens is at the presynaptic terminal, in response to the arrival of the action potential, releases a substance called neurotransmitter, a chemical called neurotransmitter. So it looks something like this. So this yellow indicates the increase in local voltage because of the arrival of the action potential. Now inside this button, like the presynaptic terminal, there are this chemical, right, of the neurotransmitter packed inside the small vesicles or packets called vesicles. Each vesicle will have a few thousand molecules of the neurotransmitter. Because of the local increase in voltage created by the action potential, it triggers a whole series of molecular events inside this button, which lead to because of which these vesicles, right, migrate towards the cell membrane, and there they spill their contents into the synaptic cleft, this space, by a process called exocytosis. And then these neurotransmitter molecules diffuse across this tiny space of 20 nanometers gap, arrive at the postsynaptic terminal. At the postsynaptic terminal, these neurotransmitters molecules bind with something called receptors, right? So that you can see that here, right? And these receptors are linked to certain ion channel, right? And they open the ion channel, right? And depending upon what kind of channel is open, you have different kinds of electrical effects on the postsynaptic side. So let us look at that a little bit. So at the neurotransmission, in the neurotransmission process, there are three molecular players: the neurotransmitter, the receptor, and the ion channel. So what happens is when neurotransmitter, this green ball is the neurotransmitter molecule. This purple thing structure which is spanning the membrane is the ion channel. Now a part of the ion channel itself, you think of it as a receptor, right? Which into which the neurotransmitter fits snugly. And that binding between neurotransmitter and the receptor, or the space basically, leads to opening of the channel, and therefore the ions here, the red molecules, flow through the ion channel. Now this is one kind of a process, so by which the neurotransmitter acts on the receptor. Then there are other kinds of receptors where the receptor is far from the channel. So in the first case, receptor and channel are all part of one protein complex. In the second case, the receptor is a bit far, right? When the neurotransmitter binds with the receptor, that triggers a cascade of molecular events, right, called second messenger pathways. So at the end of this pathway, right, it leads to opening of a channel which is far from the receptor, and then again the ions flow into the ion channel. So in both cases, the end result is the starting point is the action potential arriving at the presynaptic terminal, which leads to the release of neurotransmitter, which the neurotransmitter binds with the receptor and opens the channel. In this case, neurotransmitter and the receptor and channel are part of the same thing. In this case, the two are separate. So the first kind of receptor is called ionotropic receptor. These are usually respond faster. The second case is called the metabotropic receptor, where the receptor and the channel are separate. The response in this case is somewhat slower. So now the same events are now amplified further and shown with the greater details. So you see that this yellow spark-like thing indicates the action potential. When it comes in, it actually opens certain voltage-sensitive calcium channels, right? And because of this calcium rushes into the button. This calcium, so basically these are the vesicles. These vesicles are held in place because of a certain protein complex. It acts like a net which holds them in place. And calcium rushing in will dissolve that net, break that net, and allow the vesicles to move towards the membrane. So each of these processes is extremely complex, right? The reason I am saying this in kind of several stages is that in the last class I've given a very simple outline of the whole process. Right? This class I'm elaborating each step into to give more details. Because if you describe the whole thing in great detail right from the beginning, it looks really complicated. It will be very difficult to follow it. So the vesicle moves towards the membrane and then releases its contents. So the neurotransmitter molecules diffuse and all the rest, we know that. So then we also talked about summation. So this is the action potential and this is the synapse. In response to that, if you record here, right, you get an EPSP. And you also can have IPSP. For some synapses, the same action potential leads to a EPSP, that is a positive deviation in the postsynaptic potential. For some synapses, it results in an IPSP, which is a negative deviation in the postsynaptic potential. Right, and so PSP can be of two types, two signs, a positive or negative. Then one more thing that can happen is the synapse. You can associate the notion of a strength of a synapse. Right, that is when you give an action potential, the PSP that you get can be a small PSP or a large PSP. When you get a high amplitude PSP, you say that the synapse is strong. When you get a low amplitude PSP, you say that the synapse is weak, right? And if you get a positive PSP, the synapse is excitatory or positive synapse. When you get a negative PSP, you say that the synapse is inhibitory or a negative synapse. Okay, and so what determines whether the PSP is going to be an excitatory or inhibitory or positive or negative, right? That depends upon, the action potential part is the same, but the difference comes because of the neurotransmitter that is released and the receptor that is corresponded to it. So there are certain neurotransmitters which are called excitatory neurotransmitters, right? And then they have a corresponding receptors. So neurotransmitter and receptor form a pair, right? Now, when the neurotransmitter acts on the receptor, if it happens to open a sodium channel, and we know that opening of sodium channel will increase the voltage, so therefore that leads to a EPSP. Okay, similarly, in case of a transmitter like a GABA, which is gamma aminobutyric acid, right? It acts on, it has two receptors. So basically, a given transmitter can have multiple receptors. For glutamate, it has three receptors: AMPA, NMDA, and kainate. And GABA has two kinds of receptors: GABA A and GABA B. Right? When either of them is activated, it opens a chloride channel. And I didn't talk about chloride channel, but chloride channel when it opens, so chloride ions rush in right from outside to inside. That will decrease the voltage inside. So therefore, it will produce an IPSP, and therefore that is an inhibitory uh, synapse. So the thing is, synapse is generally named after the neurotransmitter that is released at that synapse. So therefore, neurotransmitters that release glutamate or glutamate, synapses where glutamate is released is called uh, uh, or neurons that release a glutamate is called, they're called glutamatergic neurons. Similarly, neurons that release GABA are called GABAergic neurons. You can also name the synapses after glutamate as glutamate synapses, and or after GABA as GABA synapses. So if you bring this whole thing together, you have a neuron here which gets input from a excitatory neuron and inhibitory neuron. So we discussed in the last class, right? So if the net effect of all these inputs, if the excitatory inputs dominate the inhibitor or are dominated by the inhibitory inputs, then the net effect of all these influences will be to keep the voltage here low or keep it negative. So therefore, neuron doesn't get excited. There's no action potential. If the net effect, so if the excitatory inputs dominate the inhibitory inputs, like in this example, like in this illustration, then the voltage of this soma here will go sufficiently high, cross the threshold, producing the action potentials. You can have one or a whole series of action potentials generated. So basically, you can think of neuron as some kind of a thresholding device. Right? It is taking input from a lot of other neurons. Some inputs are positive, some inputs are negative. It adds them up all. And if the net effect crosses a threshold, it will get excited and fire. And if net effect doesn't cross threshold, it doesn't get excited. Okay, so you can think of this threshold as, so actually in reality, it is more complicated kind of saturation curve, but you can simplify it using some kind of a step function, right? So basically you can think of it as a thresholding device. So let us stop our neuron discussion here, right? Let us take a short break and look at, so go to our math topic.